as well as everyone here in the Gompa. So happy you're here today for this second class in this course that I'm calling, How to Awaken, four paths to awaken a kind heart. And I'll go over what we went through last week shortly, but I just wanted to start with some prayers. And so if we could get those on the screen. Again, keep in mind, prayers in Buddhism are really just about putting our thoughts in a particular direction. And so we're going to begin by taking refuge, generating bodhicitta, these two important concepts in Buddhism to find some safe direction in the Buddha's teachings, as well as to generate our motivation for being here. And we'll also do a short meditation to do that as well. Maybe not that short today, because I do want to lead a meditation on last week's topic, equanimity. So let's go ahead and do the prayers together.
Taking refuge once in English and twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I crave through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodan soki chonam la chonchu baru dagni kapsuchi Dagi chonen gepe sonam gi drola penshir sange drupar sho sange chodan soki chonam la chanshu baru dagni kapsuchi dagi chonen gepe sonam gi Drola penshir sange drupar sho.
Thank you, Mary, for leading the prayers. So let's go ahead and do a meditation. So again, last week we dealt with the first of what are called the Four Immeasurables. And the first one is setting the ground for the practice of the other ones. We'll begin today with the three remaining classes. So the ground that we're setting is the ground of equanimity. So again, for those of you who weren't here last week, equanimity is essentially this even-mindedness that we want to have towards all beings. Right now, we isolate beings into three groups, and there's something quite natural about that. We have those that we're quite close to. We call our friends, acquaintances, family, what have you. And we have those that we're quite distant from, which are the enemies, difficult people in our lives. And then we have a lot of people that we're sort of indifferent towards, what we call the strangers, the neutral people. So we're going to do a short meditation on working with this technique of kind of equalizing our mind with regard to all of these beings. We'll do it by taking a select person from each of those three groups and kind of looking at our current attitudes and how we might change those attitudes through some of the thoughts that we went through last week. So that's what we're going to work on in this short meditation. I mentioned last week that I thought it would be useful to do at least a short meditation on each of the four immeasurables so that if you aren't doing these on your own, at least you have some practice, some taste of doing meditation on them. So as usual, we're going to begin with just a few minutes of focusing on the breath to calm the mind. If you already have a technique that you use with the breath, feel free to use that. If you need a suggestion, then I would suggest tuning into the sensation at the tip of the nose. There's a very subtle sensation of the air coming in when we inhale and then going back out when we exhale. You just want to bring your awareness, your attention to that sensation there. Whenever the mind wanders, when you see that that's happened, you start thinking about things you're doing later today or something that happened last week or whatever the case might be. When you see that that's occurred, no judgment, just simply let it go. Let that thought just kind of dissipate in the space of the mind, and then bring the awareness back to the breath. So we'll do this in silence for just a few minutes, and then I'll lead you in this meditation on equanimity, and then we'll set our motivation on the basis of that. So to do this meditation on equanimity, I'm going to use the imagery that we worked with last week. Each of us kind of doing our own one-person show in this life. We're on our stage, and we have the theater filled with all the other beings. And of course, the ones that we pay the most attention to are those that are in the front rows. They're there, lit up by the stage lights. We can see their smiling faces. They applaud us. They throw flowers, towards us. They keep us going because they are the people that we're quite dear to. And then we have the dark of the theater, where we have all the strangers, the beings who are behind the scenes. They play a role in our lives, but it's very indirect. So we tend not to focus on them so much. And then we have the disruptors, the people who try to ruin our show. And we call these sometimes enemies or difficult people. You might see them as the people that come into the theater and throw tomatoes at us or something. They don't like us so much. And of course, we have three attitudes towards these three groups that are distorted that we want to try to remove. We have attachment towards those front row people. Attachment is the mind that seeks to get what we want out of others. We might have some love for them, but we're mainly concerned about what they do for us. We're happy to continue to be in their show and applaud them as long as they continue to do that for us. And then towards the strangers, we have an attitude of indifference. We don't really care about them so much. And then towards the people who are disrupting our show, we tend to generate animosity. We get angry, upset, even hateful towards those beings. So we're going to select one person from each of these groups that we're going to bring onto our front stage and work with. So I want you to just to spend a moment kind of getting that imagery, that idea of these three groups of beings, getting clear about your attitude currently towards them, and selecting one from each group that you're comfortable working with, bringing them up onto the stage with you through this visualization and trying to even your mind towards them. And for the strangers, if you have difficulty finding someone that you can visualize, just think about somebody who maybe works at a grocery store where you shop, or somebody who works with you, but you don't really know them so well. Or even someone else here in the room with us today who you don't know. And simply bring that face, that person to mind. Now we're going to go through one of the techniques of working with seeing them all as equal. And this is the idea that every one of these beings, although in this life, this is how they are in your theater, in those particular groups, there's nothing fixed about that. It's all very impermanent. Even in this lifetime, an enemy, a difficult person, can become a friend. A friend can become a stranger. Stranger can become an enemy. There's nothing fixed about their identity. So why do we have these fixed attitudes? Why are we attached to that friend that we're visualizing? Why do we have indifference towards the stranger? An animosity towards the difficult person? There's no solid foundation for this. And if we consider countless other lifetimes, which is what Buddhism says has been happening, we've been in different relationships with every one of these beings in every single lifetime. Our worst enemy has been our dearest friend. Both of those have been strangers to us in other lifetimes. So, on your own, just work with each of these individuals. Start with the friend, look at them, and recognize that there's nothing fixed about that role. So, why do I have attachment towards that person? For the stranger, recognize the indifference you have, and once more, not a solid foundation for that, because that person could actually become someone very dear to you, or a difficult person for you. And then also the enemy, the difficult person. Is your mind of animosity towards them really valid when that person has actually been very dear to you in other lifetimes, maybe even in this lifetime, and could become that in this lifetime at some point in the future? So just let you spend a couple minutes kind of analyzing with regard to each of these three beings, trying to undermine these distorted attitudes that we have of attachment, indifference, and hatred. So hopefully, we've arrived at some place of kind of even mindedness towards these three, seeing that these roles are not fixed. The attitudes that we have towards these beings isn't really grounded in anything solid and lasting. Can we extend that idea to the groups that they represent, the people in the front rows, every one of them, exactly the same as this friend on the stage? Try to see them in the same light, as well as those in the dark of the theater, all the strangers, as well as all who disrupt your show, the enemies, the difficult people. We're not trying to develop a sort of blah mind towards them, but rather a mind that has an equal regard and equal concern for every one of them. Not going to let these distorted minds get in the way of our opening our heart to each and every one of them. We can also recall how every one of these beings, regardless of where they're at in our show, in our theater, is exactly the same in wanting to be happy and wanting to not suffer. Moreover, they have not yet found the happiness they seek, nor have they attained freedom from all suffering. So here we channel this into our motivation for being here. With this equal regard towards all beings, may our time together today be dedicated to helping ourselves become more capable of bringing all of these beings to the state of happiness that they desire, to freeing them from all suffering, all dissatisfaction, helping them to achieve their greatest potential. And we think in particular, may we be able to do this by actualizing our own potential, becoming a Buddha so we can then benefit all these beings. And it's for this reason that we're here today to continue our investigation of these four immeasurable thoughts. You can open your eyes fully and we'll start our class. Okay, so again, that was a really brief meditation. There again are the three reasons. Let me put these on the screen and then I'll check in and see if we do have any comments or questions. Oh, I remember what I wanted to do before we get started. Let's go ahead and recite the four immeasurable thoughts, the prayer that we have. Again, there are the four parts to this where we think kind of in this wonderful prayer of how wonderful it would be if that were so, because we also, of course, want all beings to abide in that state of an equanimity. This larger, more powerful thought, may they abide in that, and then thinking we will do this, we will help them. And then we can invoke all of the Buddhas, the gurus, all these wonderful beings who have attained that state of enlightenment to help us, to give us blessings so we can do that. So let's recite this together, and then I'll do a little bit more on equanimity. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were to abide in equanimity, free from the attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May they abide in equanimity. I myself will cause them to abide in equanimity. Please, Guru Deity, grant me blessings to be able to do this. And then the topic for today, immeasurable love. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings had happiness and the causes of happiness. May they have happiness and its causes. I myself will cause them to have happiness and its causes. Please, Guru Deity, grant me blessings to be able to do this. Then its companion thought, immeasurable compassion. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were free of suffering and the causes of suffering. May they be free of suffering and its causes. I myself will cause them to be free of suffering and its causes. Please, Guru Deity, grant me blessings to be able to do this. Then the last, immeasurable joy, where we generate great joy at all beings being in a state of happiness free from suffering. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were never separated from the happiness of higher rebirth and liberation. May they never be separated from these. I myself will cause them to never be separated from these. Please, Guru Deity, grant me blessings to be able to do this. All right, so again, going back to and by the way, both of these documents that are on the screen are available at the course materials tab at that little link at the website for this course. So feel free to grab those yourself and work with them. And when we talked about cultivating our own equanimity, which is what we were doing in the meditation today, we have these three ideas that we're trying to work with. The first one is what we meditated on in the center of the screen there, impermanence, that these relationships change over time, both within a single lifetime and over lifetime. Some of you may not have confidence in rebirth and the fact that there have been countless existences before this one. There'll be more stretching out, in front of us until we're free of birth. But nonetheless, if we've been in this rotating situation where beings are not in a fixed role, we can undermine some of these attitudes that we have towards them because we see, again, there's no solid foundation for those attitudes of attachment towards friends, indifference towards strangers, animosity towards the difficult people. The second one is also very useful, differing perspectives, that other people have relationships with them that are different from the ones we have with them. You take it off screen for a minute, because I think this one I mentioned last week, I find really quite powerful sometimes. If you have somebody who's appearing to you as your difficult person, your enemy, your challenging person, because of what they've done, maybe personally to you, harmed you, or those that you love, or maybe they just hold views that you just don't like, you think are not good for the world or whatever, you can see that other people have a different perspective of that person, right? For someone else, that might be their dearest friend. For someone else, it's a complete stranger. So when we have this idea that's like latching onto somebody with some sense of a fixed identity of who they are, that identity isn't even fixed when it comes to other people's perception. So someone else could see them, again, through a very different light than what we see them. that can often undermine it as well, because we see, wow, they're not this inherently evil, awful person that's my enemy, or inherently wonderful, delightful, lovable person that's my friend, or completely ignorable person that's a stranger. They all are playing these different roles with regard to different beings. The last one is what we meditated on very briefly at the end when we were setting our motivation, is that all of these beings, regardless of where they are in our individual theater, they all have the wish to be happy and to not suffer. All have the same basic qualities, both positive and negative, in their minds, and that the very nature of all of their minds is the same, with the same potential. I didn't go into all of that, but it said that every single being has what we call Buddha nature, has the ability to transform their minds into that state. So when we are putting people in these categories, it's natural to do that, as I said earlier, but we want to not let these distorted attitudes go out to them, because every being is in the fundamentally same situation, and every being has the same potential. We all have Buddha nature. Buddha nature is essentially the fact that all of our minds are not, in their very nature, obscured by these afflictions: anger, attachment, hatred, jealousy, what have you, ignorance. These things are in our minds, but they're there adventitiously, meaning that they are there until something comes along that will oppose them. Remember, I think I mentioned this last week, our whole Buddhist path is essentially to try to remove what is negative in the mind and to replace it with what is positive. This is our work. That's essentially what it comes down to in all of our Buddhist practice. So that's why we are diligent in paying attention to our minds and meditating on these topics, so that we can then bring to mind, when we see something negative arising, something that counteracts it, that produces something more favorable. If we can do this for ourselves, then we can help others to do that same work. That's the whole logic behind becoming a Buddha for the sake of all beings, is so that we can help them to achieve their potential, because every being has Buddha nature. Even the ants that are coming out now in the warmer weather, even the politicians around the world, whatever the case might be, all of them have the same potential. So let me check in and see if there are any questions on equanimity and working with this in terms of one's own equanimity towards beings. And then, of course, in the immeasurable thoughts, we want all beings to abide in this. And as I said last week, that's an outrageous thought. Like, if you could think about what our world would be like if every being didn't have attachment towards people that they like, hatred towards people they dislike, indifference towards everyone else, if we all had this like big heart that was open to all beings equally, God, it would be an amazing world, right? So it starts with you. Gandhi said, so you have to be the change you want to see in the world. So if you want to see that in your world around you, start with yourself. That's where everything begins. But any questions, comments? Online, anyone have anything? Mark, please, we've got the microphone here in the Gompa, so if you do have a question, wait for the microphone so those online as well as the recording can get that. So yes.
I do it a little differently.
Mhm.
I just assume that when I see an enemy,
Mm.
it's a delusion, and that the whole problem is fear and all kinds of stuff growing within me. And so I imagine what it would be like if the fear wasn't there.
Wow. Mhm.
And it brings this freedom, because if it seems like I spend most of my life trying to not step on people's toes and create bad relationships and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So it's almost frightening how much freedom there is in not living in a world of enemies, and yeah, that's what.
No, that's good. I think that's a wonderful technique to use with enemies. Let's see that again. Lama Zopa Rinpoche used to say, no enemy inside, no enemy outside. Who creates the enemy after all? The course I did in December, remember? The 4 Sundays I did in December were all about how we can transform situations that are negative into something that is quite positive. So if we have someone manifesting in that way, doing things that do cause us to have some pain, some suffering, some difficulty, it's our choice as to how to look at them. If we see that it's our own fear and our own delusions that make them into an enemy, essentially, well, we can also generate more positive minds. We can say, oh, what can I learn from this person? This is my greatest guru coming into my life, right? Someone who's actually going to teach me all kinds of things if I'm open to receiving the lesson. It does take some openness on our side, but our enemies, as we put it in quotes here, our enemies are our greatest teachers. They are actually the ones who will teach us patience and be able to help us to extend our compassion in a much larger circle than what we can currently. We need enemies. We need difficult people in our lives. So this causes us to look at those people who are doing things, again, that we oppose or that we find. And once more, I mentioned this last week, I think. I'm pretty sure I mentioned this. We can oppose the actions of people without putting them in that category, right? If we do see people who are harming others, who through their actions are causing pain and suffering in the world, we absolutely have an obligation to stand up to that, to say this is wrong, these actions are wrong. It doesn't make them a horrible person. We all have our delusions, right? Every one of us suffers from crazy states of mind that we've done things that we're horribly embarrassed about, right? Sometimes I even point this out when we're dealing with this whole thing of seeing people who are challenging for us in this kind of negative light. Think about a time when you were the negative person towards somebody. Every one of us has done it, right? At least once. We've been that horrible person that caused pain or suffering to somebody else through what we said or did. Would you want to be seen as that for the rest of your life? That's who you are? That person who caused that pain or difficulty, right? We know we're much, much more than that. We know we have many facets to us, many other parts of us. So whenever we're experiencing anybody, we're seeing like one little facet that might be a minimum part of who they are. And they've got many other facets that we're blind to at that moment because we're focusing in on that, we're making that the whole person. Right? That's crazy. That's crazy. So again, all of these techniques are really useful, especially with enemies or difficult people, to see that they are actually the ones that we should be welcoming into our theater and say, giving them more tomatoes to throw at us perhaps or something, doing whatever we can to take advantage of the fact that they're there. And we've created the situation through our own karma. It's something that is giving us a lesson we need to learn. And we can learn a lot from them. Please come on in. Yeah. So again, I think that there are a lot of techniques to be useful that can be useful at this time. And thank you for sharing that, Mark, to really recognize that we're creating it, that person that we're calling an enemy through the force of our own thoughts, the way that we're thinking about them, the fear we're having, what have you. We can choose to look at it very differently. If we can actually look at everyone in our theater as having some benefit in terms of helping us on our path, helping us in terms of our welfare, well, then it can opens our heart to their situation even more. That's what we're going to get into a bit today when we talk about immeasurable love. There's a companion thought about seeing their kindness. It helps us to open our heart to them. Because even those difficult people we can choose to see as kind if we put it in this light. They are actually the kindest people to us because while they're not showing us kindness in terms of conventional language, they're unkind, they are actually showing us a great kindness by helping us to work on our stuff. Any other comments or questions? Thanks for that, Mark. Yes, Gary, please. The microphone there. Thanks, Mary.
Hi, and thank you. I don't know if this came up in the teaching last week or if it was Hera and I driving home, but I use the same person for all three places in the theater. One of our sons who's occupying a lot of real estate inside our heads right now. And so then I took that to someone in the back row, and it was pretty easy to have them move to the front row and move into the stranger part. But then when I took somebody from the stranger part, it seemed easy, the clerk or whatever, to move them to the front row and just have that be an interaction of kindness or fun as you check out. But I wasn't able to necessarily move them to the back row. Anyway, I thought I'd just comment on that and see if you had any comments on moving people around.
I mean, I think that's kind of the gist of our thoughts about them, is to see that, again, we do have an ability to see them as rotating within this life even. And what you brought about in terms of, I think I mentioned this last week, when I do a course that's called Conscious Relationships, I talk about how we might have one person in our life who is really all three of those, depending on what time of day it is and what they're doing, right? Most of the time they might be the friend, they're in the front row, but there are sometimes where they say something and we're like, I don't even know that person. They're kind of in the dark of the theater, and so in a sense, we mentally kind of move them there and we go, who is this person that I'm in this close relationship with? And then we have times when they say or do things that are really hurtful. I mean, this does happen in relationships, right? Because they know us so well, they know how to get our goat. You can say exactly what will kind of get the spot that'll make us hurt, right? And then we're like, oh, and we immediately put them in that. They're the person throwing tomatoes at us, and we want to hold on to that view. But they also were the one in the front row, and they also are in the dark of the theater. So where do they really belong? I mean, seeing that sort of flexibility or an ability to relate to them in different aspects is part of loosening up that fixed idea that are these distorted attitudes. So we aren't holding on to those so tightly, and we have a little more freedom, a little more space in our minds. And as I said, it doesn't go to this place of just being blah about them. Then we just have this theater full of people that we feel the same about every one of them, so we end up feeling indifferent towards all of them. It's not to cultivate that. It's to cultivate the mind that embraces all of them equally. It says, I'm going to generate an equal regard for every one of them and not close my heart to a single one. So whatever works in terms of that, I mean, if you want to physically, in your mind, visualizing them moving to the other part of the theater or whatever, I think that can be useful because we can see that certainly when we look at countless lifetimes, every being has been in every one of those roles. Rotating life after life, and even within a life. So don't get so fixed on who's in your theater in the front row right now, because that's where we tend to get really fixated. And of course, the people throwing tomatoes, and then everyone else we ignore. Those two are just the way that they're appearing in this life, and just the way they're appearing at this time in this life. I mentioned this last time that there was a woman I worked with at Levi Strauss when I was there as an accountant. I went from accounting to teaching Buddhism. I don't know how that through the kindness of the lamas somehow. I don't know. But she was my boss at one point, and I really didn't like her at all. I mean, I really had a hard time working for her. And then she moved to another department. And then a few years later, I worked on a project with her, and it was a totally different experience, right? Because the dynamic had changed, the relationship had changed, and suddenly, she became someone I befriended a lot. And I came to really see her in a very different light. Every one of us has stuff that we are blind to in regard to others. It's that wonderful quote again. I don't remember who this quote is from. The idea is that everyone is carrying a great burden, even our most difficult people in our lives. We don't know what's all going on for people. We don't know to what extent they are going through difficult, challenging times in their own life, and that's why they might be manifesting as that person that throws tomatoes. And we've been that as well. We've been going through difficult times sometimes and doing things that we regret. So why be so fixated again on that particular view, that particular scenario, that particular occasion, pigeonholing somebody into exactly what we think they are when that isn't accurate at all? We're all quite rich individuals with very many different facets to who we are. So maybe that's enough about equanimity, unless there were any other comments. Thanks for that, Gary, as well. Okay, let's go on to immeasurable love. Love is a big word, right? It's something that we use in all the spiritual traditions, all cultures. Oh, I'm sorry, there's something online. Sorry, Shayla. You got a question there from someone or comment?
Yes.
We're not hearing you. Are you talking right now?
Yes, I am.
Oh, there you go. Okay, we got you.
T says in chat, no enemy inside equals no enemy outside by Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And then she says, love this.
Yeah,
so,
good
comment.
All right, good. No, that's a really good quote to work with, kind of to recognize that at those moments, we're creating the enemy. I don't want to, again, we're not letting the other person completely off the hook in terms of their actions. If their actions are something that need to be stopped because they're going to cause harm and suffering and what have you, then we need to do that, but as skillfully and as compassionately as we can. And one of the biggest problems that we have is because we don't have equanimity, we don't have this mind that embraces the entire picture and sees everything completely. So again, we might have compassion for the people who are being harmed, but we lack compassion for the harm giver. Let's just go in our culture. It's pervasive in our culture, right? Where we have a lot of compassion for the victims, we don't have any for the perpetrators. But victim and perpetrator, as we know from our teachings on karma, are this karmic dance that beings keep going through. The victim in this life becomes the perpetrator in the next life, and the perpetrator in this life becomes the victim in the next life. Sometimes even within that life, but certainly karmically, this is what plays out. So we have to have this even mind that's willing to look at others through that lens so that our compassion is complete, our love is complete. That's the reason why we engage in that first. Again, I might mention that again. I had that in last week's teaching. In some of the more traditional teachings, equanimity is last. In the Mahayana teachings, we put it first because it really does set the stage for how we can engage with all beings equally, with an equal regard for their welfare through generating immeasurable love, topic today, and then immeasurable compassion. So thank you, Shayla, the comment from T. I think that's very important to recognize where does enemy and stranger come from. Okay, so let's go on to the next page of this little handout that I put together on immeasurable love, the second page. Just a quote from Kathleen MacDonald, again, a wonderful book that covers the Four Immeasurables. She also has some teachings on the 8 verses of training the mind, which is really very quite nice teachings. But the desire for happiness unites all beings, she says, human and non-human. Feeling love for others means acknowledging this desire, respecting it, and doing what we can to fulfill it. This kind of love is sometimes called loving kindness, to distinguish it from love that is mixed with lust or selfish attachment. Loving kindness is pure, unselfish, and unconditional. Immeasurable love means wishing all beings to have happiness and its causes. So again, we're talking about an elevated form of love, not an ordinary form of love that is conditioned on whether you are in my front row or not, which is what we tend to do with our love. And what most beings get quite focused on is I can extend my love to the people who also love and care about me, but to everyone else, can't quite go there. I debated about bringing this into today's teaching, but it became a kind of an obvious topic somehow on the internet. I came across it, and some of you may have heard about this. The current vice president made a comment. He's Catholic, as many of you know. I grew up Catholic. That he felt that he would justify what the government is doing on the basis of this Catholic concept. It was from Saint Augustine of Hippo, who set out what's called ordo amoris. Did anyone, show of hands, anyone who heard about this week? This is one reason I wanted to bring it up, because I'm not trying to make a political statement by this. I'm just trying to investigate this from a Buddhist perspective. What this means, there's an article, a wonderful article on Vox.com, which is a commentary on this. But essentially what the vice president said is he said, he laid out this very Christian concept. You love your family, and then you love your neighbor, and then you love your community, and then you love your fellow citizens in your own country. And then after that, you can focus on and prioritize the rest of the world. And he says a lot of the far left has completely inverted that. Ordo amoris is the order of love. That's what he was spelling out. Like, you love here first in this little tight circle, and then you get to the next circle, and then you get to the next circle, and if you have the resources and time and energy, then maybe you can think about the people on the other side of the planet. I want to open it up to a little discussion. What do you see as the faults in that thinking, if any? Feel free to chime in. Call it. Pardon? He needs to come and talk. Anyone online too? I mean, yes, please, Coral. Let's. Okay. Yeah.
Doesn't that statement negate interconnectedness, interdependency, and puts the separation out there instead of seeing everything as one, seeing everything as separate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This is the biggest one in my estimation, is that it denies interdependence. We'll talk about that in a moment. Yeah, Lou.
And speaking of Catholicism and Christianity, that is not a statement that Jesus ever made.
Right. This is
Period.
another, I mean, and I don't want to get too much into Christian theology because it's not really why we're here today. But even when I go back and look at many people have taken offense who are Christian at those statements because they don't feel like that's what Jesus taught at all. Even though St. Augustine of Hippo might have said it, he didn't mean it as like a rule or an order that you have to follow in order to practice Christian love. Anyway, that's a whole nother discussion. I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but I appreciate it. I mean, even the thought that, that Christ had of he said, whatever you do to the least of people, that you do to him, and actually it encompasses everyone. I don't think Jesus's love was meant to be focused on just a narrow group of people. But anyway, any other problems that you have with that, or things that you see as faults in that way of giving an order to love, an order to how we care about those in our world? I can find a few other Buddhist faults. Yeah.
It's complete self-cherishing to me. That's
Yeah.
why I said he needs Yamantaka.
Thank you, Chesum. Yeah, this idea of self-cherishing, some of you may not know this term that we use in Buddhism quite frequently. We sometimes use the term self-centeredness. It's a form of attachment. It's a form where we become very attached to ourselves and what is important to us, and we neglect what is not. So that's another thing we'll follow up on in a minute. So we have interdependence, we have the self-cherishing attachment mind. I see a third fault in here. There was something that goes back to the equanimity teachings, right? We're only relating to things in terms of this life, right? Which is already going to be problematic. Because if we're only attached to the view we have of this life, these beings who happen to be manifesting in this life as that first narrow circle, well, that's ignoring the fact that everyone else has been in that first circle in another lifetime. Remember, I mentioned this last week, I'm pretty sure I did. If somebody gave you a gift when you were 10 years old and gives you a gift now, and a different person gives you a gift now, do you value those two people differently? They both gave you a gift, right? So if we're just looking at a longer horizon, looking at another lifetime when they were in your front row and they paid attention to you and loved you and cared you and cared for you, and now someone in your life caring for you, it's the same. They've done the same thing. Every being has been in these three roles countless times with regard to us. So we're only looking at this lifetime. Now, of course, I don't expect Christianity to look at things beyond this lifetime because they don't teach that there is another lifetime beyond this other than, in heaven, what have you. But I see these as the three faults from a Buddhist perspective that I can easily say it doesn't hold. We don't have an order to our love on the basis of interdependence. Because as Coral's pointing out, we are intimately connected to all beings. This is part of the meditation that I want you to investigate in supporting why you can have love for all beings. Because every being is showing you, even in this lifetime, some measure of kindness. We'll go into that shortly. But it's, again, might depend upon us looking at it that way, as we were talking about earlier in regard to Mark's comment, enemies, what have you. Can we look at even the challenging people as being kind to us? The second one, in regard to it being an aspect of our self-cherishing, attached mind that is only looking out for what is of concern to me, or at least that's where it starts. I'm not saying J.D. Vance is saying that you just have a circle like this, but he's giving priority to that. He's saying, this is most important. Take care of those that you love and are loving you. Well, that's totally self-cherishing, total attachment. I'm not saying don't take care of those people, but recognize that you can often have attachment coming into play with that. Have love for them, have a healthy concern for their welfare, but recognize how you grasp at those people. You want those people to keep giving you the strokes, and you're happy to give them the strokes then, as long as it's mutual. That's conditional. That's what the mind of attachment's all about. That's not genuine love. The third one, in terms of the impermanence, the floating roles, this is also, there would be no order to our love, because how do we even start that? Because every being has been in those different roles to us. Every being's been in our front row. Every being has been your closest, dearest companion in a lifetime. So if they did it in this lifetime, you think they're more important than the one who did it the lifetime before, or the lifetime before that, or the lifetime before that? I mean, Buddhism has a lot of teachings that kind of undermine that sense of there being this order to our love. Now, having said that, we do have to recognize that that's what we're trying to overcome. When we get to these meditations on love, we need to try to recognize how our love generally is somewhat limited. We only tend to pay attention to the happiness and welfare of the front row people. And occasionally we care about the dark of the theater where the strangers are, when suddenly they appear on TV maybe, and we go, oh, look at the suffering that's going on in Gaza, or look at the suffering that's going on in, where there have been natural disasters like the fires and floods and what have you. When those break through and suddenly we see strangers on our screen and we go, oh, I need to get online and make a contribution to Red Cross or whatever to help out people who are suffering in that way. Occasionally, we might care about those beings and have some regard for their welfare, some concern about their happiness. Usually, we're quite limited in how we love them, how we care for them. And then, of course, the enemies, the difficult people, who wants to love them, right? Most of us want nothing to do with them. Might even tell a little story. Let me go ahead and tell it right now. I'm going to try to make it as short as possible because some of you have heard this story before. It's in a wonderful book by Lauren Ladner on compassion. I can't remember the full title. Lauren is another student of Lama Zopa Rinpoche's, and there was one of Lama Zopa's students in Australia who went to a social gathering one day. And the person who invited them all there was talking about the problem he was having with a neighbor. And this neighbor had initially sideswiped his car going into their driveway or whatever and parked inside the garage and then went in their house and didn't even come out to say, I'm sorry, I sideswiped your car. But somehow they knew through the other neighbors or whatever that that was the one who did it. This man was the one who did this. So they had this really horrible interaction around getting the car fixed and all of that. So the car's all fixed. He said, then he went out one morning and there was a keying of the car on one side all the way down the length of the car. And of course, he didn't see his neighbor doing this, but he figured it was his neighbor upset that he had to deal with paying for the car to get fixed and what have you. So he had the insurance fix the car again. And now there's another key mark on the car. So he's like talking to everyone at this gathering and saying, what should I do? I've got this neighbor who's, I think, has done this twice now, as well as sideswiping the car originally. And he got all these bits of advice from people who are saying the normal conventional things, which is, go over there and key their car and da-da-da. I mean, all the things that you think that we have a society that's very revenge-minded, right? And then this student of Lama Zopa said, well, I don't know what I would do, but I think I have an idea of what Lama Zopa might do. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, for those of you who don't know, is the one underneath, the lower figure there. At the top is Lama Yeshe, founder of our organization. But he said, what I think Lama Zopa would want you to do is to figure out something that's like the nicest gift that you could give this person. Go over there, apologize for anything you've done to harm them, and give them that gift. And this person thought about it, and he said, of course, a lot of people at this gathering were like, no way, that's horrible. I mean, why would you do that, right? So anyway, this man, Stuart, I think was his name, he thought about it after the party, after the gathering, and he said, what the heck, I'll try this. And he knew that this man was an avid golfer. I don't golf, so I don't know what it means to buy a box of really nice golf balls, but apparently this is what he did. He bought this gift of these amazing golf balls, wrapped them up really nicely, goes over to his neighbor's door, knocks on the door, and the neighbor appears with some trepidation. And he says, I'm sorry for anything I've done that has harmed you, and please accept this gift, as an apology for everything I've done. And the man kind of grabbed the gift and went inside and closed the door. And Stuart's like, well, that was interesting. He didn't know what happened. But he says he felt better after having done this. So he went back home. And within 5 minutes, his neighbor had opened the gift, comes over there, and he says, this is the kindest thing anyone's ever done for me. Thank you so much, and I'm so sorry for everything I've done that has harmed you. We have our choices about how we relate to those people who we consider enemies. And if we extend love, Again, I'm not saying that's an ideal thing in every situation. We shouldn't put ourselves in danger necessarily, but at the same time, we have to kind of get out of our comfort zone. One of my friends told me, you don't really grow unless you're outside your comfort zone. And it's really true. Where do we grow? And that's what these four immeasurables are about. They're about growing, as I mentioned last week. One aspect of them being immeasurable is that we can grow them to a limitless degree. Well, right now, our love is kind of contained. It's like right here in this little space of this very narrow heart, kind of like the Grinch when he has the box. The heart kind of grows outside of that. We have to make our heart grow outside of that. We have to find ways to enlarge our love, not to shrink it. And I fear that words that, like the vice president said, are causing people to shrink their love, shrink their concern. Make America great again will make us great again. Make those I care about great again. To hell with everyone else. Again, that's not a mentality that we teach in Buddhism. And I don't think it's taught in Christianity either. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to make Christianity the devil here or the enemy. No, not at all. I think actually all spiritual traditions teach a similar concept. But to do this, we have to work on it. And you can't just like flip a switch and suddenly you've got a measurable love for all beings. So let's talk about how we do that. I was going to go into a little bit about the benefits of developing loving kindness, but I think we all know it to some degree. If we have a heart of love towards others, we tend to be not harmed by others as much. Literally. And this is what it means to kind of live in that path of love. Something that, again, in traditional teachings, they have something like loving kindness. I might mention that when we are getting into these thoughts of generating love towards ourselves and towards others, we are wishing for beings to have happiness. And I want to talk a little bit about what we mean by that. Because as we're going to see, when we get into this, we're going to work with that kind of idea. This is often called metta meditation in the Pali tradition. The idea is that when we're wishing for ourselves or others to have happiness, there are different types of happiness, right? I mean, most of us are quite familiar with the first, which is more of that kind of hedonic happiness, the happiness of sense pleasures, the happiness of having comforts in our lives and what have you. And there's nothing wrong with wishing that for others, wishing for people to have what they need to sustain their lives, to actually have some measure of comfort. You can remember if you studied it, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? That you can't get to this self-actualization level without having food on your plate and all the other things that we need to sustain these lives and make us kind of content as individuals. And so it's okay to wish that at some level, but we're really wishing for much deeper happiness, a more lasting happiness. Something that will actually be the happiness we'll then be able to have all the time. This is what we might call our inner happiness, the happiness that comes through changing our minds, through developing our qualities. Every one of these things that we're talking about, equanimity, love, compassion, joy, all of these are about enhancing our own minds and our own well-being at the same time while we are actively engaged in the welfare of others. So the point is that we can actually experience these deeper states of well-being. In Western psychology, they call these eudaimonic, I think I'm pronouncing it right, eudaimonic happiness versus hedonic happiness, where we find a happiness from a greater sense of purpose and meaning and connection in our lives, as opposed to just the transitory pleasures that we all experience, watching a good movie or having a nice walk out in nature with a friend or something. Those things are fine to wish for others. Of course, when we get into the state of those sorts of more temporal forms of happiness, we aren't wishing for people to have distorted happiness, like the schadenfreude, that joy someone else's suffering, or something that, it's a horrible thing to have. If we were actually taking delight in having of other people or whatever the case might be, some people do have that form of happiness. Perhaps we've had those states of happiness. We're never taking happiness in else's misery. So when we wish for ourselves or others to have happiness, that's off the table. Don't wish for any kind of happiness that could arise from someone else's misfortune. The temporal happiness is okay, but we want to always think beyond that, these more lasting forms of happiness. There was one quote that I wanted to share from a book by Venerable Matthew Ricard. This is, let me see if I can find where he talks about that in here. He says, this is a book called Happiness of All Things. It's a really wonderful book. He also wrote one on altruism that is like this thick. I haven't gotten around to reading it yet, but he's a monk in the Nyingma tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. He says, by happiness, I mean here a deep sense of flourishing that arises from an exceptionally healthy mind. This is not a mere pleasurable feeling, a fleeting emotion, or a mood, but an optimal state of being. This is what we're really wanting beings to have ideally, is for them to find that kind of deeper sense of well-being that will radiate out to others and be the source of happiness and well-being for them. Lama Zopa Rinpoche used happiness of Dharma. Of course, we're not saying that it's only unique to the Buddha Dharma that you can obtain this, but we're saying that this is the role of Dharma is to bring us this inner happiness, to bring us this state of well-being that transcends the conditionality of our world around us, that then whenever we're with whoever we happen to meet, whatever situation we happen to be in, we are able to abide in that state. And there's amazing stories that His Holiness hears from these folks who come across the mountains from Tibet to escape the occupied territory there. And one of them was this man who was imprisoned for quite a while. And when His Holiness asked him, he said, did you face any dangers while you were in Tibet and being imprisoned and what have you? And he said, oh yes, I had danger, a lot of the time. And His Holiness said, well, can you tell me a bit more about that? And he said, oh, I had the danger of losing my compassion for my captors all the time. But he was able to be in that space of compassion for his captors and a state of well-being that was driven by this compassion and love and so on. That's kind of what we're looking for, a more sustainable happiness that we can generate from within. And then we have it wherever we go. We can be with, people who we absolutely couldn't stand before, but we're happy and content inside because we can work with our minds in those situations. It goes back to what I said. Buddhism is all about working with our minds, all about trying to generate the qualities that will be the deeper source of well-being for us. So when we get into practice, put on the screen, we're really talking about wishing initially ourselves to have happiness all the way through, certainly having this deeper state of well-being, but then also the same thing for others. Another quote from, no, I don't know that I need to share that one. Kathleen McDonald also speaks to this in her book. Maybe just before we go into that, one more thing, which are the obstacles to love. What are the things that kind of get in the way? Well, some of what we tendency to be self-cherishing, self-centered, that we don't think that there's any need for us to extend our love beyond that front rows of our theater, right? The people who are there tending to us, they're the objects of our love. Everyone else doesn't really matter again. But we also have, of course, the anger, the hatred that might get in the way in terms of the difficult people in our lives, where we feel that we can justify more easily a mind of hatred towards them than we can a mind of love. Something that we're going to try to undermine by some of the I'm going to introduce you to in a moment. And then, of course, the attachment that we have, that we've already spoken of, that really is solely looking at things from the point of view of what takes care of me. What are the things? All right. Let me share the sheet that I have put together here for you with the 2 meditations. As I said, we're going to start with love for oneself. Now, love for oneself is not, it is concern for one's well-being. So in this reflection that I'm going to encourage you to do over the next week, this is part of it, and certainly you can do both of these meditations in a single session if you have time. But it's consider how you are the same as all beings in wanting to be happy and to have the causes of happiness. Once more, we have to start with ourselves. Master Shantideva in his text, he says, how can we possibly generate the thought for another that we haven't yet wished for ourselves? If you haven't wished for your own genuine happiness and well-being, how can you generate the thought for others to have that? We're not doing this once more to support our selfishness, to support our really focused on our own well-being. We're doing this to recognize the commonality that we have with all others and enlarge that muscle of love by going after our own situation first, saying, okay, I'm going to generate love thoughts, kindness towards myself. Begin there, and then I can extend it. We have it to ourselves and other beings who are our friends. But sometimes we don't have really good love for ourselves. I'm going to do that as well next Sunday. I think one of the problems in our culture, I even see this when people come to Buddhism, and I see it in myself when I came to Buddhism. We tend to think about others sometimes without looking at our own situation first. It's just a tendency that we have in our culture. I don't know where it comes from. We kind of have this way of ignoring ourselves. This is a form of spiritual bypassing, I think. John Wellwood coined this term, idea that we have this vision of where we want to be, which is quite out there in the future, and we're just going to jump over all of our other garbage to get there. Pay no attention to it. We really have to work on ourselves first. Some of you may find that as you go through this, that you need to work is necessarily generating love, loving kindness and compassion for others, really just for yourself, and that's okay. We do have a lot of talk to give to ourselves that is really quite cruel, quite unkind. The wonderful teacher, I'll talk about this a little bit next week, maybe too, Kristen Neff, who's done a lot of research into self-compassion. She says that the way that we talk to ourselves, if we talk to all of our friends that way, they would not be our friends at all, right? How much do we beat ourselves up and say negative things about ourselves and, all the, oh, you stupid idiot, what are you doing? I mean, and if you saw anybody around you, they'd leave you. They'd be like, hell with you. I don't want to hang around you, right? So we have to be careful about how we treat ourselves first. How we treat ourselves is how we treat others. Right? So let's go on to the steps involved in this. Just wanted to make sure people understand. This isn't self-cherishing. This isn't. So it says there, generate an attitude of loving kindness for yourself, remembering the following. Accept yourself as you are with all your present faults and shortcomings. Doesn't mean that you can't do better. Doesn't mean that there isn't room for improvement. It's just you need to be accepted in your current situation, in your current state, kind of embraced, warts and all. That's just the nature of things, right? We all have that. Remember the Suzuki Roshi, according to, I can't remember where I got this quote first, maybe Jack Kornfield or Pema Chodron. Anyway, they said in a gathering of people, he said to them, you're all perfect just as you are, and you could use a little work, right? Many of you have heard this before. That's our situation, right? We need to accept ourselves where we are. We all have our faults and flaws. We could use a little work, but accept yourself where you are. Otherwise, again, it just doesn't make any sense. We are always measuring ourselves against an idea of who we should be versus who we really are at this time. Then secondly, be a friend to yourself, not being angry or frustrated that you aren't the person you'd ideally like to be. Third, acknowledge your potential to change and grow, to experience greater happiness, peace, and positive qualities. Now, this is once more our Buddha nature. We have the ability to develop these qualities to a limitless degree because your mind is physical. Your mind is not bounded in the way that your body is. Fourth, give yourself the space to fulfill that potential, truly wishing yourself to be happy. Because down to it, what I was just talking about in terms of this deeper state of well-being and happiness, that is what happiness looks like, is when we have our potential actualized to be completely loving and kind and compassionate, the beings that we are meant to be. Venerable Rabina often compares our Buddha nature to an acorn. An acorn has the potential to do what? To become an oak tree, right? To grow into an oak tree. But we can do a lot of things with acorns. We can, maybe when you're a kid, you might paint a little face on it and then decorate the little hat, or you might shoot them at people. Hopefully you didn't use a sling and arrow or, whatever. But the idea is that, a lot of things we could use our mind for as well. And use your mind to be entertained by all the various things that we have in our world. And we have more entertainment now than you could possibly wish for at our fingertips any time of day. Or you can use your mind for its true potential. Its potential is to become a Buddha. How do you become a Buddha? Remove Negative tendencies, enhancing the positive qualities. So every time we contribute to this, and we're looking at ourselves here in this first meditation, generating more love for others, generating more compassion, we're actualizing our potential, increasing our potential, becoming better beings, becoming closer to Buddhahood, especially when we do it with that motivation, which once more is how we're trying to ideally look at these meditations, in the light of them being a support to our becoming a Buddha, developing bodhicitta, and so on. So then, hold that wish, that last arrow there, hold that wish in the space of thoughts such as, may I be happy, may I be safe, free from harm and danger. May I have all that I need to be truly happy, peaceful, and satisfied. May all my thoughts and actions be positive and all my experiences good. In other words, everything being fruitful, using everything on the path, maintaining a positive state of mind. Whatever works for you, these are just a suggestion. You know, different teachers will give different suggestions in terms of this metta meditation. It starts with yourself, though. And then the last one is kind of a nice one to add here. Imagine that the warm energy of loving kindness in your heart radiates out, gradually filling your body and mind, and you become suffused with happiness and its causes. So again, it's a nice little meditation to do. Won't have time to do it today. We'll start with a loving kindness meditation next Sunday at the beginning, immeasurable love. We go on then and we cultivate love for the three groups. This is a nice way to do it, to put this intermediate step of kind of working within the paradigm of the three groups of the beings in your theater. You know, the front row friends, the darkness strangers, and then the interrupters, the enemies. Start with friends, then move on to strangers or neutral people, and finally work with enemies, those with whom we have a difficult relationship. I know that the order is sometimes given differently in some teachings on equanimity. If you find it difficult working with friends first, recognize that, yeah, you can start wherever you want. I know some people have said they find difficulty working with strangers the most because those are the people we don't really know. But I think there's something refreshing about that because we can impute whatever we want on them, right? They haven't yet appeared as a friend or an enemy, so we can just think about them in a very kind of casual way because we can generate loving thoughts towards them without too much problem. And with friends, we once more do have love generally for them, but it can become tainted. Of course, the enemies or difficult people are beings that we have a lot of challenges with generating love towards. And you can do this very gradually. Then it says, recall the meditation on equanimity, even-mindedness towards all three categories. I mean, if you're finding that too much of the attachment, indifference, and hatred are arising, well, then go back to the equanimity meditation. And then it says, extend loving kindness to each of these three groups by recalling the way that they have been kind to us. This is what I mentioned earlier that I want to go through briefly in the time we have left. Addendum 1, I've added points for meditation on the kindness of all beings. And then, of course, wishing them happiness in a similar way as when working with oneself. You know, we generate those same thoughts. May these beings have happiness and the causes of happiness and so on. The first addendum, which is where I have put together some, that's for the last session, points for meditation on the kindness of all beings. There's a wonderful saying in the Geshe Chikawa's 7-point mind training, is meditate on the kindness of all beings. It's really quite profound to think about the ways that others are kind to us, but we have to redefine what we mean by kindness. Otherwise, it's only the front row beings, right? Because they're the ones that are directly kind to us. So as it says here, in this meditation, we can gain an appreciation for the kindness of every living being by thinking about the direct and indirect, as well as even the intentional and unintentional kindness that we experience from the three categories of beings: friends, difficult people, and strangers. Okay, with the friends, it's not really too complicated, right? Because friends and loved ones, they're directly and intentionally kind to us. That's what we normally call kindness in our society. Is, are you being kind? Well, then you're doing nice things for others. You're taking care of them, your needs, what have you, all right? So again, you can think about those who have in the past and currently contribute to your welfare and so on. That's kind of all very clear. Feel a deep appreciation for the kindness that you receive from these dear ones in your life. When it comes to meditating on the kindness of the vast number of those who are strangers, these are people who generally are quite indirectly and usually unintentionally kind to us. Let me point out, I'm going to take it off screen for a moment. I've referred to this frequently because it's still quite fresh in all of our memories. Remember what it was like. And some of you were the frontline people during the pandemic, but a lot of us were the people who were benefiting from the frontline people during the pandemic, who were staying home, isolating so that the virus wasn't running rampant. And we still needed food to eat, and we still needed gas in our cars or whatever you use, electricity, everything, all of the resources that we need just to have a comfortable life. People were doing that. Beings were doing that while we were tending to ourselves, right? Okay, so there are myriad ways that we can reflect on that others contribute to your welfare indirectly. That's once more, those strangers in the theater. Those are the people who are behind the scenes. And we don't really pay much attention to them, but we can think about how they contribute to our well-being. And we might not know exactly when the stranger walking down the street, we go, oh, that person works at so-and-so, and they help contribute to my welfare by doing this or that. There's nothing stopping us from imagining that every being is playing some role that contributes to your welfare, or they're contributing to that person's welfare who contributes to your welfare. We're in this web of interconnectedness. As out, this is what flies in the face of our love being only conditional to those beings who are quite directly kind to us, who are in our little narrow circle. All those other beings are contributing to your welfare as well. To what extent can you have loving kindness towards them? Well, acknowledge that kindness. Acknowledge the ways that you would not be here right now. Literally, we would not be here if those beings had not continued doing what they were doing during the pandemic. Imagine, it was shocking enough to go to the grocery store and see like huge shelves empty where you couldn't get particular things. But we didn't, I didn't starve. I don't think any of you, probably there were some places in the world where people did starve because people weren't able to do that work. We benefited from the kindness of others, and we still do. Everything that you receive that contributes to your immediate welfare is through the kindness of other beings. And of course, we need those beings in our lives for a lot of other reasons, to practice our acts of compassion and so on. So again, I'm not going to read through this all. You can all read this on your own. I don't think I need to, read every word for you. The final one is to meditate on the kindness of even those who are difficult in our lives. These are, again, we often see as the opposite of kind, since they are directly and intentionally harmful to us or those that we care about through their behavior, their views, and so on. Right? Those are the people that, I had one, I have to admit, there was one teaching I did over on 2nd Street. I don't think I handled it very skillfully, but there was one student there who could not get this idea or could not accept the fact that I was calling this kindness. What I want to frame this is that these beings, alluded to it earlier, these beings who are difficult in our lives, we can choose to see as showing us kindness. It does take a little mental gymnastics, because as I just pointed out, they are the ones who are doing what we often call unkind things towards us, the opposite of kind. They're doing that to us, to others that we care about, to beings who we have concern about. And it's happening in our country right now, right? Where many of us have concern about people who are experiencing harm. And there are people who we see as involved in creating that harm. We have to be able to extend our heart to those beings by seeing what they're doing, not as a kindness to those beings that they're perpetrating these acts on, but as a kindness to us, because we can enlarge our compassion and our love for beings on the basis of that. We can get outside of our comfort zone, outside of this narrow range of concern, and say, I also am concerned about their welfare. And if you think about it, this is the best thought to have towards people who are difficult people in your life, right? Because if you're actually wishing for them to be happy and to have the causes of happiness and not just a fleeting temporary happiness, this deeper state of well-being, this eudaimonic happiness, well, then you're helping them to be free from all of what's plaguing their minds that's making them do these things. Why do beings hurt other beings? Because they don't have a mind that's happy. They don't have these inner causes of happiness. They're ending their heart. So it all makes sense. I know I've had questions from people where they say, well, yeah, I can generate love towards this person and that person, but towards that person, whatever politician or whatever, I can't do it. But if we But that's the best thought to have towards them. That's the thought that will actually, if that came to pass, that would be the unlocking of everything. Because they could no longer engage in actions that were harmful to others because they had that loving kindness and compassion and concern themselves, because that's what we mean by wishing them happiness. That's why I emphasized that earlier. We're not just wishing for people to have a nice meal and a nice, walk in the woods or whatever. We're wishing for them to actually become everything that they have the potential to become. So this is, again, I think these thoughts are completely valid and justified, especially in the world that we live in, where we see a lot of beings that our hearts close down. We don't want to think about them or their welfare, but we're trying to generate thoughts that are concerned about this deeper sense of welfare. So that second point, and yet we can still see what appears to be unkind as a kindness, since without such challenging people in our lives, we cannot develop and strengthen our compassion, love, and patience. It's related to ourselves. We generate these greater qualities, but once more, the thoughts we're having towards others are the most beneficial ones for them as well. They may not get it. They may not be able to change their lives in this, or their minds in this life, but they, eventually, hopefully will. So all three of these are about cultivating this strong sense. I think that was, there's a conclusion. Once you think about appreciating each of those three groups, in this way, there are no beings who cannot be seen as kind, for every one of them has been kind to you in one of these ways. Try to feel a connection and a sense of gratitude for all this kindness that you've received. So again, this is the idea behind this larger meditation, where we're trying to go outside of just loving kindness towards ourselves and start thinking about extending it to these three groups. Eventually you get to, I won't go back to the handout, but eventually you get to those thoughts that are encompassed in the immeasurable prayer, where you think, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. How wonderful it would be if that were so, and so on. Let me stop here. 6 minutes, sorry. Didn't give more time for questions, but yeah. Yes, got a comment or a question, yeah. And Amanda will come to you in just a moment after Lee.
I'm sorry, I just have a quick question, but I've been done with this, or I've been thinking about this since last week.
Mhm.
The man who got his car keyed, couldn't he, in some ways, he created the causes and conditions for that. And so can't we go to that place where if those people in the rows that are saying bad thing and throwing stuff at us, we created, is it correct thinking? We created the causes and conditions for that, and it's our karma. And
Right. Yeah, I think that's a perfectly valid thought. I didn't put it as part of this, though we talked about it in the How to Transform Suffering into Happiness course, right? That once we frame things in terms of this is an experience of our own creation. The suffering that we are going through right now, we created. The problem with this thought, and I mentioned it that time as well, is that almost immediately in our culture leads to feeling horrible about ourselves, leads to feeling guilt. And I'm not saying that that's what you're putting forward. I'm just saying that, again, there's nothing wrong with that thought. And if we can do it healthily and make sure that we're not reverting it into kind of a guilt and a feeling horrible about ourselves, then I think it's perfectly fine.
Yes, I agree with what you just said. That's just my next thing. The next question is, well, couldn't we see it as karma purified in some ways? Like it's a good thing?
Yeah, you can certainly have that perspective as well, that you see that, okay, this is ripened now so that I can exhaust that karma, if you will, and I don't have to experience it again. But of course, the lesson that we always have to learn is that don't create the causes for it to happen again then. If we keep stepping in it, we keep doing the same thing again and again by reacting negatively to the person who's harming us. You might say, oh yeah, this is my karma, it's ripening now, it's exhausted, but then I'm still going to get angry at them. Well, you're only going to cause yourself future suffering. Karma is a huge topic. We're just skirting on the surface of it, but know that it's quite complex. But the idea is that we don't experience anything we haven't created the causes for: happiness, suffering, neutral experiences, whatever. So that's a very valuable way to look at those situations. Absolutely. Let's go to Amanda online first, and then if there are any other questions here in the compa. Yes, please, Amanda.
I was really interested to read what you had in the handout about having love for oneself and those ideas. And I found that that if I don't get that, if I don't work on that, I find it almost impossible to do the other ones, like the way I see myself is, it's part of an ignorance. And so, I would work with the other points that you have there. And I just couldn't seem to make a breakthrough like I would. I knew them intellectually, but it just didn't seem to make any difference. And then I remember thinking, it's kind of like what you were saying, like you had someone in the audience, and that person in the audience, well, to their mother, they're not a stranger. And to their dog walker, like all the different people in their lives see them differently. And so I was thinking about myself, and I was thinking, well, so-and-so doesn't see me like that. They see me as a friend. And then so-and-so sees me like a, they don't know me. And then I was also thinking, well, at 9 o'clock this morning, I definitely wasn't like that because I was whatever. And as I started to think that way, I was thinking, well, this thing that I don't like about myself, it can't be inherent, because if it was, it would be there all the time, wherever I was, whatever I was doing. And even though that was just this tiny little thing, I absolutely clung to that, and I'm still doing all the things I didn't like about myself, but at least I can think, well, it's not inherent, it's not inherent. It means that one day it can go because it's not inherent. So I just wanted to thank you, because all those points, they reminded me of what I'd been thinking about, and I found it really reassuring. And the whole class was really, really helpful. Thank you.
Oh, you're too kind, Amanda. Thank you. I'm glad that the teachings are of use to you. But I think what you brought up is a really, really important point, that these things are not inherently there. I mean, this gets to this deeper truth that Buddhism teaches, what we call emptiness. Things don't have any inherent existence, meaning that they're all arising on the basis of causes and conditions and don't have any real substantial entity to them. So when we look at our own minds, we can see that in the course of even a few minutes, our minds can go all over the place and all sorts of different thoughts. None of those are you. None of those define your mind or are there in an inherent way. They're all arising on the basis of certain causes and conditions. That's why we can become enlightened, because none of that is kind of set in stone. It's nothing that is there concretely, inherently. It all can be changed. It's all workable. So have faith in that, have confidence in that, and just keep doing the work. And if you're finding things that are useful, again, I hope you find this course and the teachings, the materials I've given you, the reflections to do in regard to these four immeasurable thoughts, then this is an important part to, pay attention to work on every day. We should have some thoughts that entertain these opening of our heart, trying to extend our love, our compassion towards other beings, and doing the things that support that. And how we're going to see change in our world. It starts with every one of us. And I don't doubt the power of that at all. I mean, I've become a bit of a proponent of nonviolence. I work with Nonviolent Santa Fe here. We're going to do a little workshop on exploring nonviolence in April here. This is what Mahatma Gandhi used as a tool to change a whole country. Right? You can change a whole country, you can change a whole world, you can change everything through these states of mind, bringing these things into our actions, into our thoughts. That's how change happens. But it starts with every one of us. And you can't put it off on other people and just say, oh, we're waiting for them to change. We're waiting for the other side of the political spectrum to change. Well, what are we doing to change ourselves? So I meant that to be a bit of a pep talk. Sorry, it sounded kind of I think it's time for us to do our prayers. I'm sorry we didn't get to it yet. Or was there another one here in the room? No. I'd rather end a little bit earlier today because I know people are very kind and always staying on a little bit later, but I'm sure everyone has busy lives and things to do. So prayers, if we could, those on screen, and Mary will lead us in those. Thank you, Mary. And thank you, Shayla, for putting them on screen.
And I also had one late announcement. I apologize so much. We have Yamantaka practice at 12:30 to 1:15 today for those who've received the empowerment. And Shayla's putting up the screen, the prayers. Dear Shayla.
Let me see if I have them here. Yeah, maybe you want to get it ready because I'm not sure I'm finding the exact prayer that you guys use. I know you use the Master Shanti Deva's prayer. Oh, Gendan Sundays, there it is. Okay. Let's do my screen share. No problem. Okay, and then maybe scroll down. Okay.
Master Shantideva's prayer. May all beings everywhere plagued by sufferings of body and mind obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with the mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world.
We'll do the prayer for His Holiness. Yes.
Long life prayer for His Holiness. Gangri Rawe Korwe Jinkam Dear Pendan Dewa Malu Jungwe Chen Rei Lingwa Tenzin Gyatso Yi Jape Si Te Bardu Tengyur Chi.
And we make dedications for all the other teachers that we and others have in this world, that they may have good health, long lives, all their wishes be fulfilled immediately. And also prayers for the very swift return of our spiritual director, Kyabje Zopa Rinpoche, so we can once more have him embodied in a form that we can benefit from and follow, receive guidance from. Lastly, we dedicate for all the beings that we're holding in our hearts, whoever they might be, all those that are on the prayer list here at the Buddhist Center, as well as individuals that we are moved by the suffering that they experience at this time. May they be free of suffering through what we have done here today, and may they find all the causes that lead them to true happiness and peace. And then in that way of extending that out, breaking through our own barriers, may this be so for all beings without exception. May they all find happiness and be free from suffering. I might share that I shared Shantideva's prayer at the Senate on Tuesday. I was invited to do the Senate prayer. I changed the words a little bit so that it maybe was, and used amen at the end. Everyone likes amen in those. Thank you all for being here today. And I'll look forward to seeing some of you on Wednesday at the class here and then Sunday for sure.